There is a young man at the bottom of a pit. He is 17 years old. His hands are dirty. His robe, the one his father gave him, the one his brothers tore off his back, is gone. Above him, the sky is a small circle of light, and around the edges of that circle, he can see his brothers eating lunch. They are not looking down. He has been in this pit long enough to understand that no one is coming, long enough to replay for the 100th time the moment the hands grabbed him, long enough to think about the dreams. Because he had dreams, 2 of them, vivid, specific, impossible dreams, the kind you can't shake when you wake up, the kind that feel like they came from somewhere outside your own head. He told his brothers about those dreams. He told his father. And now he is at the bottom of a hole in the ground while his brothers pass bread to each other and decide what price he might fetch from a passing caravan. Here is what nobody tells you about the dreams of the Bible. They are almost never comfortable. They are almost never about the dreamer getting what they want. And they almost never make sense at the moment they arrive. But every single one of them came true. This video is about every dream God sent in the Bible, from the first one in Genesis to the last one before the cross. We are going to walk through all of them. We are going to meet the kings who dreamed, the prisoners who interpreted, the wise men who followed a dream home by a different road. We are going to meet the one woman who received a dream she couldn't act on, who sent the message, who tried to stop it, and the man who ignored her. That dream is the one we need to talk about most. We will get there. But not yet. Let's start at the beginning, which is not Joseph. Joseph is the middle. The beginning is a king most people have never heard of, and a dream God sent him about a woman whose name he didn't even know. The king's name was Abimelech. He was the ruler of a city called Gerar, somewhere in the territory we now call the Negev Desert. And one night, God came to him in a dream and said 4 words that must have made his stomach drop. "You're a dead man." Abimelech had taken a woman into his household. Her name was Sarah. She was beautiful, and the man who traveled with her, a wanderer named Abraham, had told Abimelech that she was his sister. She was not his sister. She was his wife. The text in Genesis Highly is careful to tell us that Abimelech had not touched her, and God, in the dream, confirms this. "I know you did this with a clear conscience," God says. But then he says something remarkable. "I kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her." Read that again. God intervened, not through a prophet, not through a burning bush, not through an earthquake, but through a dream. He interrupted the sleep of a pagan king in a foreign land to protect a woman, and through her to protect a bloodline that would one day carry the entire history of salvation. Abimelech woke up and immediately returned Sarah to her husband. Here's what most people miss about this dream. It is the first dream in the Bible in which God speaks directly. And God sends it not to Abraham, the man of faith, the one he has a covenant with, but to the outsider, the foreigner, the man with no prior relationship with the God of Israel. This will become a pattern. Pay attention to it, because God is not limited to speaking to people who already know him. He is not limited to the faithful, the devout, the ones who have been praying all their lives. He will use whoever he needs, sleeping kings, pagan generals, foreign astrologers, to accomplish what he has already decided will happen. The Hebrew word for dream throughout Genesis is shalom, from a root that means to be made strong, to be restored to health. The rabbis noticed this. They said that in a dream, the soul rises slightly out of the body, just far enough to hear things the waking mind is too loud to receive. You don't have to take that literally to feel the truth inside it. There is something about the sleeping mind, quieted, undefended, that can receive what the waking mind argues away. Abimelech received the message. He obeyed it. He was spared. Jacob would not be so immediately obedient. Jacob was a man running from consequences. He had engineered himself. He had stolen his brother's blessing. He had deceived his dying father. And now he was fleeing north, toward a place called Haran, sleeping on the open ground, with a stone for a pillow, utterly alone for perhaps the first time in his life. And then the dream came. Stay with me. One is extraordinary. In the dream, Jacob sees a staircase or a ramp The Hebrew word Sulam appears only once in the entire Bible, and scholars have argued about its exact shape for centuries, reaching from the earth up to heaven. Angels are going up and down on it. And at the top, God himself is standing, and God says, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And then this is the part that should stop you. God says, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. Wherever you go. Jacob is a liar. Jacob is a fugitive. Jacob has just defrauded his blind father and stolen from his own brother. And God does not appear to him in this dream to correct him or to condemn him. God appears to him to make a promise. Because that is the nature of these dreams. They are not rewards. They are not given to the righteous as a prize for good behavior. From the broken, the fleeing, the confused, the imprisoned, to people who have no ability to accomplish what God is about to tell them. That is the point. If they could do it themselves, they wouldn't need the dream. Jacob woke up trembling. He set up the stone he had slept on as a pillar and poured oil on it. And he called the place Bethel, the house of God. He had been sleeping in a field. He woke up in the house of God. And it's where it gets remarkable, because Jacob would receive another dream years later after he had worked 14 years for his uncle Laban and fathered 12 sons and was still, in many ways, the same complicated, scheming man he had always been. In that second dream, God told him it was time to go home. And in that same night, God appeared to Laban, Jacob's uncle, who was chasing him down, and said, simply be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. One dream stopped the pursuer, one dream moved the pursued. God was working both ends of the chase. Which brings us to Joseph. And this is where the dreams stop being individual moments and start becoming a system. Joseph was the 11th of 12 sons, and he made the mistake that only the young and the favored make. He assumed that because something was true, it was safe to say out loud. He had two dreams. In the first, he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in a field when his sheaf stood upright, and all his brothers' sheaves gathered around it and bowed down. In the second dream, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to him. He told his brothers the first dream. Their hatred of him increased. He told his father the second. His father rebuked him publicly. What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And this detail is easy to miss. The text says his father kept the saying in mind. Jacob rebuked Joseph in front of the brothers. But in private, he kept the dream. Maybe because Jacob knew something about impossible dreams and long waiting. Maybe because he had slept at Bethel with a stone under his head and woken up in the house of God. Maybe because he understood, in the way that men who have been broken and remade understand, that when a dream feels too large to be your own invention, it probably isn't. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers for 20 pieces of silver. He ended up in Egypt in the house of a man named Potiphar. He rose. He was falsely accused. He fell. He ended up in prison. And in the prison, he met two men. Pharaoh's cupbearer and Pharaoh's baker had both offended their master and been thrown into the same facility as Joseph. One morning, Joseph noticed they looked troubled. He asked why. They both had dreams the night before, vivid, specific dreams, and there was no one to interpret them. And Joseph said something that should stop every person who has ever tried to take credit for a gift that wasn't theirs. He said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me. Not I am a skilled interpreter. Not I have studied these things. Do not interpretations belong to God?" He listened to the cupbearer's dream first. 3 branches, blossoming grapes, Pharaoh's cup pressed and filled. Joseph said, "In 3 days Pharaoh will restore you to your position." Then the baker, encouraged, shared his dream. 3 baskets on his head, birds eating the bread from the top basket. Joseph said, "In 3 days Pharaoh will lift off your head." He will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh. Same time frame, opposite outcomes, same dreamer God speaking both fates simultaneously through two sleeping men in an Egyptian prison on the same night. 3 days later, both came true exactly as Joseph said. Here's the part nobody tells you. The cupbearer was restored to his position and immediately forgot about Joseph. He didn't mention him to Pharaoh. He didn't advocate for him. He walked back into the palace, back into his old life, and Joseph stayed in prison for 2 more years. 2 more years. Think about what that costs a person. You interpreted correctly. You helped someone. You asked for one thing in return, mention me to Pharaoh, tell him I'm here. I shouldn't be in this prison. And the man you helped walks away and doesn't look back. Joseph had been in Egypt for years. By this point, he had been a slave. He had been falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit. He had been in prison. He was still there. And every dream he had ever received, the sheaves, the stars, must have seemed in those 2 years of silence like the cruelest kind of joke. But here is what was happening, though Joseph could not see it. God was not slow. God was precise, because Pharaoh's dreams were coming. And when they came, they would require an interpreter. And the interpreter needed to be a man whose character had been tested in exactly the kind of fire Joseph had been sitting in for years. A man who had learned in the lowest possible circumstances that interpretations belong to God, not to the interpreter. You cannot shortcut that formation. You cannot rush it. And so Joseph waited. 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed. He stood on the bank of the Nile. 7 cows came up from the river, fat, sleek, beautiful. Then 7 more, thin, gaunt, ugly. And the thin cows swallowed the fat ones whole. He woke up. He fell back asleep. 7 heads of grain on one stalk, plump and good. Then 7 thin heads, scorched by the east wind. The thin head swallowed the full ones. Pharaoh woke up disturbed. He called every magician and wise man in Egypt. None of them could interpret the dreams. And then cupbearer remembered. He told Pharaoh about the Hebrew prisoner. Pharaoh sent for him immediately. Joseph was pulled from the prison, cleaned up, brought before the most powerful man in the world. And Pharaoh said, I have heard that you can interpret dreams. Joseph said, and listen carefully to how he answered, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Not yes, I can, not I have a gift. It is not in me. He interpreted the dreams in 60 seconds flat. 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine. God sent the dream twice, Joseph told Pharaoh, because the matter is fixed. It is already decided, and God will bring it about soon. Pharaoh looked at this man, this foreign prisoner, this Hebrew slave, and said, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Then one morning, Joseph went from a prison cell to the second most powerful position in Egypt, because he had a dream at 17. Because the dream was true, because the road between the dream and its fulfillment ran straight through the pit, through the slave market, through the false accusation, through the prison, through 2 years of silence. The dream was never wrong. The road was just longer than he expected. The dreams of Genesis are mostly personal. They come to individuals, a patriarch, a prisoner, a king, and they shape a single life or a single nation. But as you move through the Old Testament, the dreams get larger. The stakes climb. And God begins to send dreams to people who have no idea who he is. This, the part of the story that should unsettle you a little, in a good way. Gideon was a farmer hiding from the Midianites, threshing wheat in a winepress, so the enemy wouldn't see him. God had already appeared to him, not in a dream, but in person, and called him a mighty warrior. Gideon had already asked for 2 signs with a fleece of wool. He was afraid. He was hesitant. He was, by his own admission, the least member of the weakest clan of the tribe of Manasseh. God told him to go down to the enemy camp at night, alone. just to listen. Gideon went, and in the Midianite camp, he overheard a soldier telling his friend about a dream. I dreamed, the soldier said, and behold, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian and came to the tent and struck it, so that it fell and turned it upside down, so that the tent lay flat. His friend interpreted immediately, this is no other than the sword of Gideon the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand. A pagan Midianite soldier in an enemy camp dreamed a dream about the man who was about to destroy him and interpreted it correctly. God did not send this dream to Gideon. He sent it to the enemy and then arranged for Gideon to overhear it. Because Gideon needed to hear it from someone who had nothing to gain by encouraging him, he needed to hear his own victory announced by the people who were about to lose. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, the text says he worshiped. And then he went back to his men and said, "Arise, for the Lord has given the camp of Midian into your hand." He didn't need another sign. The enemy's dream was enough. God dreams through enemies when his own people are too afraid to believe. Now watch what happens next, because the next dream is the most intimate in the entire Old Testament. Solomon had just become king. He was young. Some scholars estimate he was around 12 to 20 years old when he took the throne, and the weight of what he had inherited was crushing. His father David had been a warrior, a poet, a man after God's own heart, and also a man whose sins had cost the kingdom more than Solomon could calculate. The ark was in Jerusalem. The temple hadn't been built yet, and Solomon was standing at the high place at Gibeon, offering 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar. That night, God appeared to him in a dream and said something that has never been said to any other person in the entire Bible. Ask what I shall give you. That's a blank check. Ask for anything. Solomon could have asked for wealth. He could have asked for long life. He could have asked for the death of his enemies. And there were enemies. Instead, he said, I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to govern this, your great people? And God said, because you have asked this, and have not asked for long life, or riches, or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. And then, because God is not stingy, he gave Solomon everything else anyway. Riches, honor, long life, conditionally, everything he hadn't asked for, because he asked for the right thing. Solomon woke up, and it was a dream. That phrase, and behold, it was a dream, appears in the text almost like an afterthought, as if the writer wants you to sit with that for a moment. He asked God for wisdom in a dream. God gave it to him in a dream, and he woke up and it was a dream. But the wisdom was real. This is what the dreams of the Bible keep insisting. The vehicle is not the point. Dreams are thin, atmospheric to solving things. You wake up and they fall apart. But what is deposited inside them, the promise, the warning, the commission, that does not dissolve with the morning. Jacob woke from Bethel with a promise still ringing. Joseph woke from his grain-field visions with a calling he couldn't shake loose even at the bottom of a pit. Solomon woke from Gibeon with a mind that would make him the wisest king in the ancient world. And then there is Nebuchadnezzar, who woke up screaming. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, the most powerful empire in the known world in the 6th century BC. He had conquered Jerusalem. He had burned the temple. He had carried the people of God into exile. He was not, by any historical measure, a man God had a covenant relationship with. He was the enemy. And God gave him the most complex prophetic dream in the entire Old Testament. He saw a great statue. Its head was gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its middle and thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron. Its feet were iron mixed with clay. And then a stone cut from a mountain without human hands struck the feet of the statue and shattered it. The gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, the clay, all of it ground to dust, scattered by the wind. And the stone that struck it became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Nebuchadnezzar woke up terrified. He summoned every wise man, every magician, every astrologer in Babylon, and demanded that they first tell him what he had dreamed, without him describing it, and then interpret it. The wise men said this was impossible. No man could do such a thing. Only the gods could know, and the gods do not dwell among men. They were right about the second part. Daniel was brought in. Daniel was a young Hebrew exile, one of the people Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Jerusalem, and Daniel asked his God for the interpretation in a night vision. God gave it to him. He stood before the most powerful man in the world and said, "You are the head of gold. After you will come an inferior kingdom, silver. Then another bronze. Then iron. Then a kingdom divided, iron mixed with clay, strong and brittle at the same time. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, represented by the stone cut without hands." The Aramaic word Daniel uses for that stone is eben, a word that in the Jewish tradition was already beginning to carry messianic resonance. A stone the builders rejected, a cornerstone, a rock that breaks everything it strikes and on which everything built without it eventually shatters. Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face before Daniel. Truly, he said, "Your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries." He said this. And then in the very next chapter, he built a 90-foot gold statue and ordered everyone to bow down to it. Human beings are complicated. But here is what matters. God used the nightmare of a pagan conqueror to describe 6 centuries in advance the rise and fall of the empires that would shape the ancient world: Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and the coming of a kingdom that would outlast all of them. He sent it to the man who had just destroyed his temple, because he was not finished, because he is never finished. Nebuchadnezzar was not done dreaming. A year after the statue dream, after Daniel had interpreted it and been honored and promoted, the king had another dream. And this one was about himself. He dreamed of a great tree at the center of the earth, visible to the ends of the world. Its top reached to heaven. Its fruit fed every creature, its branches sheltered every bird. It was enormous, magnificent, the kind of image that announces itself immediately as a symbol of power. And then a heavenly messenger descended in the dream and cried out, "Cut down the tree, strip its branches, scatter its fruit, drive away the animals, but leave the stump in the ground bound with iron and bronze. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him." Nebuchadnezzar woke up and called for Daniel. Daniel's face went pale when he heard the dream. The text says he was appalled for a moment, sham, the Aramaic, meaning frozen with shock. He didn't want to say what he saw. Nebuchadnezzar told him not to be frightened by it. And Daniel said, quietly, something that reveals everything about his character: "My Lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies." He wished it were for someone else, because Daniel cared about this man, even this man, the destroyer of Jerusalem, the king of the empire that had enslaved his people. The interpretation was this: the tree was Nebuchadnezzar. The cutting down was coming. He would be driven away from human society and eat grass like an ox and be wet with the dew of heaven until 7 years had passed, until he knew that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. Daniel's counsel was direct: break off your sins by practicing righteousness and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed. Perhaps, he said, God would relent. 12 months later, Nebuchadnezzar was walking on the roof of his palace in Babylon. And he said, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence, and for the glory of my majesty?" The words were still in his mouth when a voice came from heaven. And immediately Nebuchadnezzar was driven from among men. He ate grass like an ox. His body was wet with dew. His hair grew like eagle's feathers. His nails like birds' claws. 7 years. And then his reason returned to him. And the first thing he did with his restored mind was look up toward heaven. And his understanding returned, and he blessed the Most High and praised and honored the one who lives forever. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, Nebuchadnezzar wrote, and he does according to his will among the hosts of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" This was written by the man who had burned Jerusalem. God sent him a dream. God waited 12 months. God executed the dream exactly as he described it. And God waited for the king to come back because the point was never punishment. The point was the moment when Nebuchadnezzar, on all fours in a field, covered in dew, looked up. Josephus, the Jewish historian of the first century, records that Nebuchadnezzar underwent a period of unusual illness, and that Babylonian records themselves preserved accounts of a king who was absent from the throne for a period of years. History outside the Bible confirmed what the Bible described. The dream was real. The humbling was real. And then there is Daniel's own dream, the one that goes the other direction. In the first year of Belshazzar's reign, Daniel had a dream of 4 great beasts coming up from the sea: a lion with eagle's wings, a bear with 3 ribs in its teeth, a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings, and a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong, with iron teeth, crushing and devouring, with 10 horns, and then a small horn that grew and had eyes like a man and a mouth speaking great things. And then the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow. His throne was fiery flames. 10,000 times, 10,000 times, 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. And one like a son of man came with the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. The Aramaic phrase for that figure, Barnash, son of man, would echo forward 6 centuries. It was the phrase Jesus used more than any other title to describe himself. Not the Christ, though he was that. Not the Son of God, though he was that too. Son of man. Bar Inash, the figure in Daniel's dream, coming with the clouds of heaven, receiving a kingdom that would never end. Daniel dreamed the arrival of the one who would make all the other dreams make sense. And then the Bible goes quiet on dreams for 400 years, 4 centuries of silence. The last of the prophets had spoken. The second temple had been built, and then nothing, no new word, no dream, no vision recorded. Until a young carpenter in Nazareth lay down to sleep, and an angel came. 400 years of silence. And then God starts dreaming again, and he sends every dream to the same man. His name was Joseph, same name as the dreamer in the pit. This Joseph was a carpenter in Nazareth, engaged to a young woman named Mary, and in the space of 2 years, he would receive 4 dreams, 4 visits, 4 instructions. And 4 times he would wake up and obey without a single recorded word of hesitation or question. The first dream came when he had already made his decision. Mary was pregnant. Joseph knew the child was not his. He was a righteous man. The Greek word the text uses is dikios, meaning just upright, a man who keeps covenant. And because he was righteous, he did not want to disgrace her publicly. He resolved to divorce her quietly, to protect her from the full weight of the law. He had made up his mind. He was going to sleep having already decided. And in the dream, an angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." Joseph woke up, and the text says, with almost no drama, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, he did as the angel commanded him. He took Mary as his wife. No argument, no further questions, no request for a second sign. He heard it once and he acted. Think about what this man was absorbing in that moment. The God of the universe had interrupted his sleep to tell him that his fiance's impossible pregnancy was divine in origin, that the child would be named Jesus, a form of the Hebrew Yeshua, meaning God saves, and that this child would save his people from their sins. Shaul, son of David, got up and obeyed. The second dream came after the Magi, the wise men. The text calls them Magoi, probably court astrologers from Persia or Babylon, men who studied the stars and ancient texts for signs of world historical significance, had followed a star to Bethlehem. They had stopped in Jerusalem and asked Herod where the king of the Jews had been born. Herod had told them. He had also instructed them to report back when they found the child, so that he too could come and worship. He had no intention of worshiping. The Magi found the child, presented their gifts, and were warned in a dream not to return to Herod. They departed to their own country by another road. That night, the angel appeared to Joseph again. "Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child, to destroy him." And Joseph rose in the night. He took the child and his mother and left for Egypt before dawn. He didn't wait until morning. He didn't pack carefully. He didn't make plans. He rose in the night. The Greek word is anistemi, meaning to stand up suddenly, the same word that will later be used for resurrection. And he moved. Herod's soldiers came to Bethlehem shortly after and killed every male child 2 years old and under. Every one of them. Theophorus does not mention this specific massacre. Bethlehem was a small village, and the numbers would have been relatively low, but the account fits precisely with everything we know of Herod's character. The man had killed his own sons. Killing infants in a village was well within his range. The child was in Egypt, because a man in Nazareth obeyed a dream in the night. The third dream came when Herod died. "Rise, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." Joseph rose and returned. The fourth dream came when he heard that Herod's son Archelaus was now ruling in Judea. He was afraid to go there, and God warned him again in a dream, and he withdrew to the district of Galilee to a city called Nazareth. 4 dreams, 4 obediences, not one recorded word. This is the part of Matthew's account that most people read past because they are looking for Jesus. But the man who received these dreams deserves your attention, because Joseph of Nazareth is the human answer to everything the dream narrative of the Bible has been asking for. Abimelech obeyed. Jacob obeyed eventually. Solomon asked well. Even Nebuchadnezzar, after 7 years in a field, came to the right conclusion. But Joseph obeys without friction, without negotiation, without asking for clarification. He is what complete trust looks like in a sleeping man's body. And here's the dream I told you we needed to talk about most, the open loop from the very beginning of this video. It did not come to Joseph. It did not come to Mary. It did not come to a disciple or a prophet or a priest. It came to a Roman woman named Claudia Procula, the wife of Pontius Pilate, and it came on the worst possible night, the night before the trial. Her name, according to tradition, is Claudia Procula. The Bible does not give her a name. Matthew simply calls her the wife of Pilate, but the early church remembered her. Origen, the 3rd century theologian, mentions her by name. The Eastern Orthodox Church eventually canonized her as a saint. She is one of the few women in the New Testament whose single action, a message sent across a courtyard during a trial, has been preserved for 2,000 years. On the morning of the crucifixion, while Jesus was standing before Pilate and the crowd was calling for his death, a note was passed to Pilate on the judgment seat. It read, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." That is the entire message. Those are the only words she speaks in the entire Bible. She had a dream. She suffered in it. The Greek word is epatha, related to pathos, meaning she experienced something that moved through her, that she felt deeply, that left a mark. She woke up and immediately sent word to her husband. She did not wait. She did not dismiss it as a strange night. She sent the message. And Pilate received it in the middle of the trial. While the crowd shouted and the priests maneuvered and the whole machinery of injustice ground forward, he received it. He read it. He looked at Jesus, and then he called for a basin of water and washed his hands. He did not stop the trial. Every other dream in this list changed the outcome. Abimelech returned Sarah, and the bloodline survived. Jacob fled and became Israel. Joseph's dreams led him to Egypt, where he saved the entire ancient world from famine. The cupbearer's dream was the thread that eventually pulled Joseph from prison. The Magi went home by another road. Joseph of Nazareth rose in the night, and the child lived. Every dream was obeyed. Every dream accomplished what it was sent to do. This one was ignored, and the man Claudia was trying to protect died before sundown. Here's what most people miss about this, and I want you to stay with this, because it is the most important thing in this entire video. God knew Pilate would not listen. He sent the dream anyway. He sent a warning to a Roman governor through his sleeping wife on the most consequential morning in human history, and he knew before she ever opened her eyes that the message would arrive too late, or be received and dismissed, or be drowned out by the shouting of a crowd. He knew, and he sent it anyway. Why? Because the dream was not primarily for Pilate's benefit. The dream was a declaration. It was God saying through the suffering of a Roman woman in the early morning hours, what he had been saying since Abimelech: I am here. I am watching. I know exactly what is happening, and I am not absent. The crucifixion was not a mistake that slipped past God's attention. It was not a tragedy he failed to prevent. Every prophet had described it. Every Passover lamb had pointed toward it. And now, on the morning it happened, God sent one more dream to the household of the man who would sign the death warrant to make certain that no one in any generation could say they didn't know. Have nothing to do with that righteous man. They didn't listen, and the righteous man died. And 3 days later, something happened that no one had dreamed. The women came to the tomb in the early morning. The stone had been moved. 2 men in dazzling clothes stood at the entrance and said the words that have been echoing through this entire story since the first angel appeared to the first frightened person in the first pages of Genesis. "You'll not be afraid." "Do not be afraid. He is not here. He has risen." No dream predicted this specific morning. No vision had described it in terms the disciples could recognize. Even those who had walked with Jesus for 3 years stood at the empty tomb and did not immediately understand. The text says the words seemed to them like nonsense, and they did not believe. The resurrection did not come in a dream. It came in daylight to weeping women in an empty garden on the first day of the week. Because some things are too large for the night. God had been speaking in dreams for 2,000 years, to patriarchs and prisoners, to pagan kings and Hebrew exiles, to a carpenter in Nazareth and a Roman woman in Jerusalem. All of it, every dream, every warning, every impossible promise delivered to a sleeping mind, all of it was building toward a morning that didn't need to come in a dream. Because it was real, fully, irreversibly, historically real. The tomb was empty, the grave clothes were folded, and the man Claudia had tried to save was walking in a garden. So here is what I want to leave you with. 3 things. The first is this: God speaks to sleeping people because sleeping people cannot argue. Every person in this story who received a dream was, in some sense, out of options. Abimelech had already taken Sarah. Jacob was already running. Joseph was already in the pit. Nebuchadnezzar was already at the height of his arrogance. Joseph of Nazareth had already made his decision. In every case, the dream arrived after the human plan had reached its limit. God does not compete with your strategy. He waits until the strategy is exhausted, and then he speaks. The second is this: every dream in this list came to someone who had no power to make it happen. A shepherd's son dreaming that his family would bow to him. A prisoner interpreting the fate of kings. A young carpenter told to name and raise the Son of God. None of them had the resources, the position, or the ability to accomplish what the dream described. That was the point. The dream was never a map of what you were capable of. It was always a map of what God had already decided to do, and your role was to be present and obedient when it arrived. The third thing is the hardest. And it is this: the most important dream in the Bible was ignored. The most urgent message was passed across a courtyard and set aside. And God used that too, because Claudia's dream was not wasted. It is sitting in the Gospel of Matthew right now, 2,000 years later, preserved in the text that hundreds of millions of people read as sacred. Every person who has ever wondered whether God was paying attention on that Friday morning, whether he saw it, whether he cared, whether the death of Jesus was a tragedy that slipped through. Every one of those people can read Matthew 27 phút 19 giây and find the answer. God was there. He sent the dream. He said of nothing to do with that righteous man. And then he let his righteous man die. Because the plan was not to prevent the cross. The plan was to defeat what was on the other side of it. The pit was real. Prison was real. The cross was real. None of them were the end of the story. They never are. If this video helped you see the Bible differently, subscribe. There are more of these coming. And if you want to go deeper, the next video is already waiting for you.